Ethan Mercer was a celebrated heart surgeon, and Sophia Reyes was a trusted ICU nurse, but a secret affair captured on hospital CCTV would lead investigators to uncover a murder that shocked the entire nation. Dr. Ethan Mercer had built a reputation that most doctors could only dream of. As one of the leading heart surgeons in the city, he was known for performing complex operations that saved lives. Patients traveled from different states to seek his treatment, and many considered him a miracle worker. Newspapers occasionally featured stories about his achievements, and hospital administrators proudly highlighted his success whenever they spoke about the institution. To the public, Ethan appeared to have everything: a prestigious career, financial security, and a stable family life. Every morning, he arrived at the hospital before sunrise. His days were packed with surgeries, consultations, and meetings. Despite the pressure, he rarely appeared stressed. Nurses admired his confidence in the operating room, and younger doctors viewed him as a mentor. His calm personality and professional image made him one of the most trusted figures in the medical community. At home, Ethan lived with his wife Claire, in a large suburban house located in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. From the outside, their marriage seemed perfect. They attended charity events together, hosted dinner parties, and were often seen smiling in public. Friends described them as a successful couple who had achieved the kind of life many people wanted. Everything began to change when Sophia Reyes joined the hospital staff. Sophia had recently moved from the Philippines after accepting a position as an ICU nurse. She quickly earned respect among her coworkers because of her dedication and attention to detail. Patients appreciated her kindness, and senior staff praised her ability to remain calm during emergencies. Because many heart surgery patients required intensive care after their operations, Sophia and Ethan frequently worked together. At first, their interactions appeared completely professional. They discussed patient recovery plans, reviewed medical records, and coordinated treatment schedules. No one paid much attention to the amount of time they spent together. As weeks turned into months, however, hospital employees started noticing unusual patterns. Ethan often appeared in the ICU even when he had no patients assigned there. Sophia's shifts sometimes changed unexpectedly, placing her near Ethan's schedule more often than necessary. Several co-workers casually mentioned the growing friendship, but nobody viewed it as a serious concern. Then small details began attracting attention. Security staff occasionally spotted the pair leaving the hospital late at night long after most employees had gone home. Maintenance workers reported seeing them together in quiet sections of the building, rarely used after regular hours. The observations seemed insignificant on their own, but they gradually formed a pattern. One evening, a routine review of security footage revealed Ethan and Sophia entering a restricted hallway that led to private recovery rooms. There was no obvious violation, yet the footage stood out because neither had official duties in that area at the time. Administrators noted the incident, but chose not to investigate further. What nobody realized was that beneath Ethan's flawless reputation and Sophia's promising future, a dangerous secret was quietly taking shape. Within the hospital's walls, hidden from patients and colleagues, events had already begun moving toward a tragedy that would shock the entire city. The relationship between Ethan Mercer and Sophia Reyes remained hidden from the public, but inside the hospital, rumors began spreading faster than either of them realized. Employees who worked overnight shifts noticed them appearing together in unexpected places. Security logs showed both of their access cards being used within minutes of each other in areas unrelated to their assigned duties. Although nothing directly proved an affair, many staff members quietly suspected that their connection had become more than professional. As the weeks passed, Ethan became increasingly careless. He frequently adjusted his schedule at the last minute, creating opportunities to spend time with Sophia. Several nurses noticed that he volunteered for patient rounds in the ICU even when other physicians were available. Some coworkers dismissed the behavior as dedication to patient care, but others found it unusual. While the rumors continued inside the hospital, changes were also becoming noticeable at Ethan's home. Claire Mercer began sensing that something was wrong. Her husband spent more time away from the house and often seemed distracted during family gatherings. He started keeping his phone with him constantly and became protective of messages and emails that had once been left open without concern. At first, Claire tried to ignore her growing suspicions. She convinced herself that Ethan was simply overwhelmed by the demands of his career. However, the excuses became harder to believe. Late-night emergencies became more frequent. Weekend meetings appeared on his schedule without warning. Even when he was physically present, his attention seemed somewhere else. The uncertainty eventually pushed Claire to seek answers. Without informing Ethan, she hired a private investigator. Within days, the investigator began documenting Ethan's movements. The findings were troubling. Photographs showed him meeting Sophia outside the hospital on multiple occasions. Security footage obtained from nearby businesses captured them entering restaurants and parking garages together. The evidence suggested a relationship that extended far beyond the workplace. Before Claire had the chance to confront her husband, another problem emerged. According to later investigative reports, Sophia had become increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Records recovered during the case indicated that she had started distancing herself from Ethan. Friends later described her as stressed and emotionally exhausted in the weeks before her disappearance. At the hospital, coworkers observed subtle changes in her behavior. She appeared distracted during shifts and often kept to herself. Several employees recalled seeing tension between her and Ethan during private meetings. Although no one overheard specific conversations, it was clear that something had changed. Then, without warning, Sophia vanished. She failed to report for work and stopped responding to calls from friends and family. Her apartment showed no signs of packing or preparation for travel. Personal belongings, identification documents, and money remained untouched. Investigators initially considered the possibility that she had chosen to leave voluntarily, but the evidence did not support that theory. As concern grew, detectives began examining every aspect of her final days. Hidden among hundreds of hours of hospital security recordings was a piece of footage that would soon transform a missing person case into something far more sinister. As concern over Sophia Reyes's disappearance intensified, detectives expanded their investigation beyond her apartment, phone records, and personal contacts. Since she had last been seen reporting for work at the hospital, investigators requested access to security footage from the days leading up to her disappearance. At first, the review appeared routine. Cameras captured employees moving through hallways, nurses changing shifts, and doctors entering operating rooms. Nothing immediately explained where Sophia had gone. Hours of footage passed without any significant discoveries. Then investigators noticed something unusual on recordings from the night she vanished. Shortly after 9 p.m., Sophia was seen walking through a corridor leading toward a private recovery wing. The area was typically reserved for patients requiring special observation and was largely empty that evening. She carried a small folder and appeared calm as she entered one of the rooms. According to hospital records, no patient had been assigned to that room at the time. Detectives continued watching. Several minutes later, Ethan Mercer appeared on camera. He walked down the same hallway and entered the very room Sophia had entered. Nothing seemed alarming at first. Doctors and nurses frequently met throughout the hospital. However, what happened next immediately drew attention. For more than 3 hours, neither of them emerged. At approximately 12:30 a.m., Ethan was recorded leaving the room alone. He appeared composed and carried a medical bag that investigators later identified as belonging to him. No footage showed Sophia leaving the room afterward. Every exit, stairwell, and hallway camera was reviewed repeatedly, yet there was no sign of her. The discovery changed the direction of the investigation overnight. Detectives obtained warrants allowing them to examine hospital records in greater detail. Access logs revealed that Ethan had entered a secured medication storage area multiple times during the same period. The records also showed irregular activity involving medications that required strict tracking procedures. When inventory reports were reviewed, investigators found discrepancies. Several doses of a powerful sedative and a cardiac medication capable of causing fatal heart failure were missing. No legitimate medical explanation accounted for their disappearance. A forensic team was brought in to search the recovery room shown on the CCTV footage. The room appeared spotless. Every surface had been cleaned, and there were no obvious signs of a struggle. Yet experienced investigators knew that carefully planned crimes often left behind hidden evidence. Using specialized forensic techniques, technicians examined areas that had recently undergone maintenance. Beneath a section of newly replaced flooring, they discovered microscopic traces of blood invisible to the naked eye. The samples were collected and sent for testing. Days later, laboratory results confirmed a devastating finding. The blood belonged to Sofia Reyes. The missing nurse was no longer considered a voluntary disappearance case. Authorities officially classified the investigation as a homicide inquiry. News of the discovery quickly spread throughout the city, attracting national media attention. As reporters surrounded the hospital and public pressure mounted, Ethan continued denying any involvement. But detectives were already uncovering evidence suggesting that Sofia's disappearance was only part of a much darker story hidden within the hospital's walls. Once Sofia Reyes's disappearance was officially classified as a homicide, investigators shifted their focus entirely toward Ethan Mercer. What had started as a search for a missing nurse was now becoming a deeper investigation into the life of one of the city's most respected surgeons. Detectives began reviewing years of hospital records, financial documents, employee complaints, and patient files. At first, they expected to find evidence connected only to Sofia's death. Instead, they uncovered a pattern that raised far more disturbing questions. A team of medical experts was assigned to examine Ethan's surgical history. Thousands of pages of records were reviewed, including post-operative reports and medication logs. During the process, analysts noticed several cases that stood out. In each instance, patients had successfully survived difficult heart surgeries and appeared to be recovering normally. Then, without warning, they suffered sudden cardiac arrests and died. Unexpected complications can happen in medicine, especially after major procedures. However, investigators found similarities that could not be easily ignored. Ethan had been directly involved in every one of the suspicious cases. The timing of the deaths followed a remarkably consistent pattern, and certain medication records contained unusual alterations. Forensic accountants and digital specialists examined electronic hospital systems. They discovered that some patient records had been modified after the deaths occurred. Login histories showed activity linked to Ethan's account. Although the changes appeared minor, they affected information related to medication administration and patient monitoring. The findings prompted authorities to reopen several previously closed cases. With court approval, investigators ordered advanced toxicology testing on preserved medical samples connected to 2 former patients. The results stunned everyone involved. Both samples contained traces of drugs that should not have been present at the recorded antras. Independent medical experts concluded that the substances could have contributed to the fatal cardiac events. As investigators continued digging, attention returned to Sofia. They searched her email accounts, computer files, and cloud storage records. Among the recovered data were research notes, screenshots of hospital documents, and lists of patient names connected to the suspicious deaths. It became increasingly clear that Sofia had discovered something alarming before she disappeared. Evidence suggested she had quietly gathered information for weeks. She appeared to be comparing medical records and documenting inconsistencies she found. Investigators believed she had become convinced that several deaths were not natural complications but deliberate acts. The small folder visible in the CCTV footage from the night she vanished suddenly became one of the most important pieces of the entire case. Authorities concluded that it likely contained evidence Sofia intended to preserve or report. Yet despite extensive searches, the folder remained missing. The theory was becoming impossible to ignore. Detectives believed Sofia had confronted evidence linking Ethan to multiple patient deaths, and had planned to expose what she found. Before she could do so, she disappeared. As prosecutors prepared murder charges and investigators closed in on Ethan, another shocking development occurred. One morning, officers arrived at his home with new warrants and discovered that he was gone. His phone was inactive, his vehicle was missing, and no one knew where he had gone. The man at the center of the investigation had vanished, triggering a nationwide manhunt. The disappearance of Ethan Mercer transformed the investigation into a nationwide manhunt. What had already become one of the most closely followed criminal cases in the country now dominated television broadcasts and newspaper headlines. Law enforcement agencies from multiple jurisdictions joined the search, distributing photographs and tracking every possible lead. Investigators believed Ethan had carefully planned his escape long before authorities were his. For nearly 3 weeks, he remained out of sight. Detectives followed hundreds of tips from the public, but most led nowhere. Some reported seeing him in airports, while others claimed he had crossed state lines. Each lead was investigated, yet none produced results. Despite the growing pressure, Ethan managed to stay ahead of authorities. The breakthrough came through financial analysis. Investigators discovered a series of small cash withdrawals made using an account linked to Ethan. The transactions were intentionally spaced apart to avoid drawing attention, but they created a trail. Surveillance footage from several locations eventually placed him traveling toward a remote region far from the city where the case had begun. The most important piece of evidence arrived when detectives reviewed footage from a gas station security camera. The recording showed a man matching Ethan's appearance purchasing supplies before driving toward a secluded lakeside area. Officers immediately focused their search there. After days of surveillance, investigators identified a small cabin hidden among dense trees near the shoreline. The property appeared abandoned from a distance, but subtle signs of activity suggested otherwise. Lights were occasionally visible after dark, and a vehicle matching Ethan's was partially concealed beneath a weathered tarp. Before sunrise, a tactical team surrounded the cabin. Every exit was covered to prevent escape. When officers entered the building, they found Ethan inside. He was taken into custody without incident, ending weeks of uncertainty. The search of the cabin revealed evidence that would ultimately destroy any remaining hope of Coon's defense. Boxes filled with hospital records lined the walls. Investigators recovered forged documents, false identification materials, and medical supplies connected to the ongoing case. Most importantly, hidden among the records was the missing folder that Sofia Reyes had carried into the recovery room on the night she disappeared. Inside were copies of patient files, medication reports, and detailed notes documenting inconsistencies connected to several suspicious deaths. The material strongly supported the theory that Sofia had uncovered information linking Ethan to crimes beyond her own murder. Forensic experts also recovered additional evidence from the cabin, including biological traces and records, connecting Ethan directly to the medications missing from the hospital inventory. Combined with the CCTV footage, laboratory findings, and recovered documents, prosecutors assembled a powerful case. The trial attracted enormous public attention. Over several months, jurors reviewed thousands of pages of evidence and listened to testimony from medical specialists, forensic scientists, investigators, and hospital employees. The prosecution argued that Ethan used his medical expertise to commit murder and conceal his actions for years. They maintained that Sofia became a target after discovering evidence that threatened to browder. After only a short period of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on multiple counts, including the murder of Sofia Reyes. Ethan Mercer was sentenced to spend the remainder of his life behind bars. What began as a secret affair hidden inside a respected hospital ended with the exposure of a killer whose carefully crafted reputation concealed a far darker reality. Even years later, the case remained one of the most shocking true crime stories the country had ever seen.